Hello, and welcome to this video where we're going to learn to build a retro gaming console with Raspberry Pi. So why would you want to do this? Well, retro gaming is hot right now. If you grew up when I did, those 8-bit and 16-bit games were all the rage, and it's funny that they're kind of back now, and some of the gameplay in those games is still better than anything else that's out there. So even though the graphics are simple and primitive compared to today's modern graphics, the gameplay is a lot of fun. And so this is a fun project that a lot of people tend to do when they get a brand new Raspberry Pi. It's fairly straightforward. Hopefully this video will be an asset to you. I won't say it's easy. There is some work you have to do, but it's fairly straightforward, and there's a lot you can do with it once you build it. So we'll learn how to build the simple beginnings of it today, and then I'll show you some things you can do later on to maybe make your project more extensive. Okay. So what are you going to need? Well, there's several things you're going to need. You're obviously going to need a Raspberry Pi, and I have my Raspberry Pi 3 here. I recommend the Raspberry Pi 3. As of this recording, this is in July of 2020. The Raspberry Pi 4 is out. It's certainly a more powerful Raspberry Pi, but it has some different requirements in terms of power and connectors. And a lot of the stuff that you're going to buy online is still kind of made for the older Raspberry Pis. So Raspberry Pi 3 is plenty fast. It'll play most retro consoles pretty well. But if you're looking for the top speed and really want to emulate some of the more modern systems, go with the Raspberry Pi 4. The Raspberry Pi 3 is also cheaper right now. It's the one that you can get for $35. So you'll need that. You'll need an HDMI cable. You'll need at least a 32 gigabyte micro SD card. You can technically get a little smaller, but I wouldn't go much smaller than that. And honestly, if you're going to have a lot of games, I would try to get even bigger. You can get those at different prices right now, and I'll show you some links later on where some of the cheaper prices are. But you can get those at a variety of places pretty easily. You're going to need a power supply, and this slideshow will be in the link description, so where you see active links here, you'll be able to click on those, and I'll provide all the links as well in the description, so don't worry about finding those. I'll make them easy for you to get. You're going to need a 5-volt 2.5 amp power supply, and that's important. With the Raspberry Pi 3, you need to make sure you have at least 5 volts and 2.5 amps. The RetroPie software does tax the Raspberry Pi pretty hard, and so you want to make sure you have a good power supply, because if you don't, if you have an older one or a power supply that doesn't give you as much power, it could damage the Raspberry Pi or just not work correctly. You're going to need a game controller, so you see a picture there. I like the 8-bit Do ones, and I'll show you where you can get those, but any USB game controller will work generally. You'll need an HDMI TV or a monitor. And then just for the setup, you're going to need another computer and then a USB keyboard. Once you have the setup complete, you obviously won't need those, but to be able to get games, or what we call ROMs, from the internet onto your Raspberry Pi, there's several ways to do it, but the way I'm going to show you requires another computer. So you'll definitely want to have another computer ready to go. And then you'll need some games to play, and so we'll spend some time talking about that as well, because that part can be a little tricky. Like I said, you can use an older Raspberry Pi, and Raspberry Pi 2 would work as well, but it'll just be obviously a little slower. But for the older systems, the 8-bit and the 16-bit systems, so like your Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega, Genesis, those, a Raspberry Pi 2 will be fine. And you can also use a Raspberry Pi 4, like I mentioned, but as you see here in this image, it has a smaller micro HDMI port, so then you need a special adapter or a special cable. You also need a USB-C connector for power. And if you have a modern smartphone, you might have that. Not an iPhone, but a modern Android phone, you might already have that. But typically, a lot of people have the stuff already around their house, or they can get it fairly cheap with the Raspberry Pi 3. So that's the one that we're going to use in this video. And that's the one I recommend, but do realize you can use a 2. I wouldn't go much lower than the 2, although you can use the Raspberry Pi 0, which is maybe another video to do more handheld style gaming. This is going to be designed to be hooked up to an HDMI TV or a monitor. Okay, so next we're going to look at what are the steps to get started.